My husband secretly raised a child with my own sister. I calmly signed the divorce papers without saying a word. But the moment he walked into his parents' house, his father froze. Then whispered, "Wait, you really don't know what she did before leaving?" The room fell silent. My husband's smug smile faded as he stared at his father, confused. I wasn't there to see it, but I knew that moment would come. I had spent months preparing for it. Just hours earlier, he had slid the divorce papers across our dining table with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. My sister sat in his car outside, watching through the windshield, unable to hide the satisfaction on her face. The same sister who had smiled at me during family dinners while secretly building another life with my husband behind my back. I picked up the pen with steady hands. No shouting, no tears, no desperate questions. "I'll sign," I said quietly. He blinked, almost disappointed that I wasn't begging him to stay. "You don't even want an explanation?" he asked. I looked at him for a long moment. The stranger sitting across from me wore the face of the man I had loved for 11 years. But everything familiar had disappeared. "I already know enough." He smirked, convinced my silence meant defeat. What he didn't know was that I had already uncovered every secret, the hidden apartment, the financial records, the messages, and the child he had been secretly raising with my own sister for nearly 6 years. I had discovered the truth weeks before he ever asked for a divorce. And before I packed my last suitcase and walked out of that house forever, I left behind something far more powerful than anger. I left the truth exactly where it needed to be, waiting for the one person whose reaction would destroy everything they thought they had built. People often mistake quietness for weakness. My husband certainly did. So did my sister. They believed that because I rarely argued, avoided drama, and chose my words carefully, I was someone who could be lied to forever. They couldn't have been more wrong. My name is Claire, and for 11 years I built my life around a marriage I thought was founded on trust. I wasn't flashy or loud. I worked as a financial consultant, where patience and attention to detail mattered more than emotion. Numbers always told the truth, even when people didn't. Looking back, I should have realized the same principle applied to my own home. My husband Ethan was charming in public. Friends admired him, neighbors respected him, and my parents often said I had found a dependable man. Behind closed doors, though, he slowly turned me into an afterthought. Missed anniversaries became busy schedules, late night. Absences became work emergencies. Every strange detail came with an explanation that sounded just believable, enough to silence my doubts. Then there was my younger sister, Lily. Ever since we were children, she had a way of drawing everyone's attention without asking for it. She borrowed my clothes, copied my hobbies, and somehow always ended up receiving praise for things I quietly helped her achieve. I never imagined she would eventually decide that my husband was something she could borrow too. Family gatherings became strangely uncomfortable long before I understood why. Ethan and Lily exchanged quick glances they thought no one noticed. They disappeared during parties for phone calls that always seemed to happen at the same time. Whenever I entered the room unexpectedly, conversations stopped a little too quickly. Still, I questioned myself instead of them. I kept believing I was imagining things, because I trusted the people closest to me more than my own instincts. That was exactly what they counted on. They underestimated the one habit I had never lost. When something doesn't make sense, I don't react, I observe. And once I start paying attention, I never stop until every missing piece falls into place. The signs were never loud enough to expose them on their own. They arrived one by one, so quietly that each could be explained away if I wanted to believe the best in them. Ethan started guarding his phone like it contained state secrets. It never left his hand, even when he walked into another room for a glass of water. If a message appeared while we were watching television, he tilted the screen away from me before reading it. Then he would offer a casual smile and say, "Just work." Lily suddenly became a frequent visitor. She always called me first, never him, asking if she could stop by for coffee. Yet somehow she arrived on the exact evenings Ethan happened to be home early. They exchanged quick smiles that disappeared the instant I looked in their direction. At family dinners, I noticed details no one else seemed to see. His glass was empty before he asked, and Lily was already filling it. She laughed a little too hard at jokes he barely finished telling. Their eyes met across the table for a fraction of a second, long enough to say something without speaking. Whenever I entered the kitchen unexpectedly, conversations ended mid-sentence. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. I tested them in small ways. One Friday, I told Ethan I would be working late. Instead, I returned home 2 hours earlier. His car was gone. Lily's was gone too. When I asked him later where he'd been, he answered without hesitation. Helping my parents with their garage. The story sounded polished, almost rehearsed. His mother mentioned the following weekend that they hadn't seen him in nearly a month. I simply smiled and changed the subject. Neither of them realized I had started keeping notes, dates, excuses, receipts, and tiny contradictions that seemed meaningless, alone but impossible to ignore together. They mistook my calm expression for blindness. In reality, every glance they shared, every uncomfortable pause, and every carefully chosen lie was quietly leading me toward a truth they believed I would never have the patience to uncover. Everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't looking for evidence anymore. I had almost convinced myself to stop. Living with constant suspicion was exhausting, and a part of me still hoped I had misunderstood everything. Then the bank called. The representative politely explained that a transfer from one of our joint investment accounts required both account holders to verify a recent address update. I hadn't requested any changes. Neither, according to Ethan, had he. I drove to the branch that afternoon. The paperwork waiting for me didn't just reveal a new mailing address, it revealed a small house, purchased 3 years earlier through a limited liability company Ethan had quietly created. The property wasn't connected to our home or any of the investments we had planned together. What caught my attention wasn't the house. It was the emergency contact listed on the documents. My sister. I didn't confront either of them. Instead, I requested copies of every record I was legally entitled to receive. My hands remained steady as I slipped the papers into my briefcase, but inside, every illusion I had protected for 11 years finally collapsed. That evening, I drove past the address. A little boy was chasing a soccer ball across the front yard while Ethan laughed beside him. Lily opened the front door carrying a birthday cake with glowing candles. The child ran into Ethan's arms without hesitation and shouted, "Dad!" No photograph, no rumor, no suspicious message. Just the truth. I stayed in my car until the candles burned low inside the dining room window. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply accepted that the marriage I had been trying to save had ended long before I learned why. As I drove home, one thought became perfectly clear. I would never compete for people who had already chosen deception. If Ethan wanted the divorce, he would have it. If Lily wanted the life they had secretly built together, she could have that too. But before I walked away, every decision I made would be careful, lawful, and impossible to undo. For the first time in months, I wasn't wondering what they were hiding. I was deciding exactly how much of the truth deserved to remain hidden. I never believed revenge should be loud. Anger makes people careless. Silence gives them confidence. And confident people often reveal far more than they intend. My career had taught me that every financial decision leaves a trail. As a financial consultant, I spent years reviewing contracts, investment records, tax filings, and business structures. I understood one simple rule. If someone hides the truth long enough, they eventually make a mistake trying to protect the lie. So I stopped thinking like a wife and started thinking like an investigator. Before signing anything, I hired one of the best family law attorneys in the state. I didn't tell Ethan. Every document he sent to me was reviewed before. I even touched a pen. My attorney wasn't interested in punishing him. She was interested in making sure every asset, account, and legal obligation was fully disclosed before the divorce became final. Meanwhile, I quietly gathered my own records. I copied bank statements, investment summaries, property documents, insurance policies, and years of tax returns. I organized everything by date, highlighting inconsistencies that Ethan assumed no one would ever notice. The hidden house, unexplained withdrawals, and company records all fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Then I prepared my final move. I packed only what belonged to me. I left the house spotless. No broken furniture. No angry notes. No dramatic farewell. Instead, I placed a sealed envelope inside the safe in our bedroom. A safe? Ethan's father knew this combination too because he had helped install it years earlier. The envelope contained copies of records, photographs, and one handwritten letter. Not for Ethan, for his parents. I knew they valued honesty above everything else. They had welcomed me into their family from the day we married, and they deserved to learn the truth from evidence instead of rumors. Only after the envelope was exactly where I wanted it did I sign the divorce papers. Ethan watched my calm expression and mistook it for surrender. He believed I was walking away with nothing. He had no idea. I had simply arranged for the truth to arrive at exactly the right door, without ever having to knock. The divorce was finalized in less than 20 minutes. The judge reviewed the paperwork, asked a few routine questions, and wished us both well. Ethan walked out of the courthouse with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed he had controlled every outcome. Lily was waiting outside, leaning against his car with a smile that said the future already belonged to them. I wished them both a quiet, sincere goodbye. No sarcasm. No bitterness. That seemed to confuse Ethan more than any argument ever could. He drove straight to his parents' house to celebrate. His mother had invited them for dinner, believing the divorce had simply been the unfortunate end of an unhappy marriage. She knew nothing about the secret relationship. Neither did his father. By then, the envelope was already waiting inside the family safe. His father opened it only because he wanted to return a few old documents that still belonged to me. Instead, he found copies of bank records, property files, dated photographs, and my handwritten letter explaining everything in calm, careful detail. Every claim was supported by evidence. There were no accusations that couldn't be proven. When Ethan stepped into the living room, his father was standing perfectly still, the papers trembling slightly in his hands. "Wait," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You really don't know what she did before leaving?" Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" His father silently handed him the file. The color drained from Ethan's face one page at a time. His mother lowered herself onto the sofa, covering her mouth as she recognized the photographs. Lily's smile disappeared the instant she realized what they were looking at. No one raised their voice. The silence was far more painful. Finally, his father looked directly at his son. "You didn't lose your marriage today," he said quietly. "You lost the respect of every person who ever trusted you." No one defended Ethan. No one blamed me. I wasn't even in the room. I was already driving toward my new home, watching the sunset through the windshield, knowing I hadn't destroyed his life. I had simply stepped aside and allowed the truth to arrive before I did. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. There were no dramatic confrontations or endless phone calls. Instead, the consequences unfolded the way they often do in real life. Slowly, steadily, and impossible to reverse. Ethan called me 3 times during the first week. I let each call go to voicemail. His messages sounded different every day. At first, he insisted there had been misunderstandings. Then he blamed circumstances. Finally, he simply asked if we could talk. There was nothing left to discuss. His parents reached out only once. His mother apologized through tears for what I had endured without anyone noticing. His father wrote a short letter that meant more to me than pages of excuses ever could. "You left with dignity. We will always remember that." Meanwhile, the carefully constructed image Ethan and Lily had protected for years began to fall apart. Friends who had admired them quietly distanced themselves after learning the timeline of their relationship. Family members stopped defending. Then once they realized the evidence wasn't based on rumors but on facts. No one could argue with documents, photographs, and dates that fit together perfectly. I never posted anything online. I never tried to embarrass them publicly. The truth had reached the people who mattered, and that was enough. For the first time in years, I stopped measuring my worth by someone else's loyalty. I realized betrayal says far more about the person who chooses it than the person forced to survive it. Losing a husband was painful. Losing a sister was heartbreaking. But losing the constant need to question my own instincts felt like freedom. If there's one reason my story matters, it's this. When people underestimate your silence, they often mistake it for surrender. In reality, silence can be the space where strength gathers. Facts are uncovered, and dignity is protected. I didn't walk away because I was defeated. I walked away because peace built on truth is worth far more than a relationship built on lies. A year has passed since I closed that chapter of my life. People often ask whether I ever forgave Ethan or my sister. The truth is, I stopped asking myself that question a long time ago. Forgiveness isn't always a single decision. Sometimes it's simply refusing to carry someone else's betrayal into your future. I sold the memories that no longer belonged to me and bought a small home overlooking a quiet lake. Every morning begins with coffee on the porch instead of wondering where someone is, who they're texting, or whether another lie is waiting for me at the end of the day. Peace, I discovered, is built from ordinary moments that no one can take away. I also returned to mentoring young professionals at my firm. Many of them came to me seeking career advice, but our conversations often drifted toward confidence, boundaries, and self-respect. I never shared every detail of my story, yet I noticed how many people had accepted less than they deserved simply because they were afraid of starting over. As for Ethan, I heard he tried more than once to repair the relationships he had broken. Some things improved with time, but trust never returned to what it once was. His parents remained polite to him, yet disappointment had quietly replaced pride. Lily eventually realized that a relationship born from deception carries the weight of that deception every single day. Their choices became their own lifelong reminder. I don't celebrate their pain. That was never the goal. My victory wasn't watching their lives become complicated. My victory was waking up one morning and realizing they were no longer the first thought on my mind. Looking back, I understand something I couldn't see while living through the betrayal. The strongest revenge is not destroying the people who hurt you. It's refusing to let them destroy the person you were meant to become. I signed the divorce papers without saying a word because I knew silence wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I finally started writing a better one.